Do 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 do. Ba 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 bum. Do 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 do. Hey everybody, come on in here. If you've got a beverage near you, momentarily we'll be doing a simultaneous sip. Not yet. Not yet. Hold. 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 All right, now grab your beverage. Get ready for the best simultaneous sip of this entire morning. Oh yeah, that's good. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, it's a little chilly here this morning, only because it's early. It's going to be perfect weather. All right. Today I promised I would teach you how to distinguish a fake news, hallucination, illusion from something real. Before we talk about that, let's talk about the shutdown. So I'm not sure everybody understands that the government shutdown is a piece of theater, not an actual event that has much impact on the real world. It does have an impact on the real world, but not nearly as much as you imagine it should. Because what gets shut down is, none of the essential services stop. Some people who are non-essential take some time off and then they get paid in arrears. Not much changes really. But what it does change is that it focuses the public on the question of who's worse, Republicans or Democrats. Who's behind it all? And then they play kind of a blame game chicken to see who the public is blaming the hardest. So you don't get a shutdown unless both sides think they can lay it off on the other one. Because otherwise they would settle. They'd say, we don't want to be blamed for the shutdown. So I would expect this will be like other shutdowns where they shut down for a while and everybody screams and kicks and says, it's you, and the other side says, it's you. But the branding has begun. Yeah, I see people already using the Schumer shutdown as the hashtag. Now, I don't know that calling it the Schumer shutdown on social media is going to make much difference. Because here's the thing, you're not going to hear that name on, let's say, on CNN. So, correct me later if I'm wrong, but unlike the president's nicknames, which are automatically news, and you just can't avoid saying it over and over, the Schumer shutdown thing is it's a little bit too on the nose, too little obvious that the whole point is to get CNN to call it a Schumer shutdown, so they're not going to do it, right? And so the Schumer shutdown will probably not get outside of the Republican world, which is good enough because you're only trying to persuade your own side in situations like this. So my guess is that the Democrats will say it's the Republicans' fault, the Republicans will say it's the Democrats' fault, and we'll get some kind of temporary something or other, but it's not a big deal. If it's the only news in the headline, it'll be treated like a big deal, but all things considered, it's not a big deal. All right, I'm in Maui right now. Would you like to see my view? So that's what I'm looking at when you're looking at me. Not bad. Just stop raining. All right. I did not go to Hana. All right, let's talk about how you can identify a fake news illusion from something real. I'm going to write about this, but I think I'll test out some of these ideas. Now, one of the biggest ways you can tell something is a hallucination versus real is what I call the elephant in the room test. All right. If you imagine well, let's not call it an elephant because you'll think Republican if I say elephant. Let's change it to monster. If you're in a room that has no furniture in it and it's just you and another person, and you see a monster, and you say, "Look at the monster! Ah, there's a monster right there, right in front of you," and the other person in the room says, "I don't see it. I don't see a monster in the room." Which one of you is hallucinating? Now, is one of you hallucinating that something isn't there? Or is the other one hallucinating that something is there? Well, in almost every case, the person who sees the thing that others can't see is the one hallucinating. Right? Apply this to the Russian collusion story. Half of the country sees it clear as day. Half of the country, and I'm in this other half, says, I don't see any kind of crime there. What are you looking at? Why are you telling me there's a monster in the room when I'm in the room too and I'm looking around and I don't see a monster? So the monster in the room test would tell you that the Russia collusion thing is a big nothing. I did not hear Jay Sekulow today. People keep asking me this in the comments. I'll check on that later. So generally speaking, the person who sees a thing that a large number of people looking at exactly the same direction and at exactly the same facts don't see is probably not there. Okay? And so it is with this, and so you'll see lots of examples of that. Now let's take a look at the situation with the release the document, or release the memo. So there's a story that is playing only on conservative sides of the media and is non-existent on the CNN side, which is your first clue. Because if it were something that passed the sniff test, CNN would kind of have to at least mention it's out there, even if they put their own spin on it. So they might say, well, it's not what you think or whatever, but they would at least report on it. All right, so your first hint about this release the memo is that somebody in the room, and lots of them, are saying, I don't see anything. Now you have people who I believe are only Republicans, and somebody needs to fact check me here. I believe it is only Republicans who are saying, my God, I've seen the memo, and it's a bombshell. It's terribly disturbing. All right? What do you know if the only thing you know is that only one side, either Republicans or Democrats, have seen a secret memo and they say it's a bombshell? What do you know about the memo? Nothing. Nothing. There is no information there. If you say to yourself, well, several Republicans have looked at it, not just one, and they all agree, it's a bombshell, it's a lot, but it's only Republicans, and it's still a secret document, what do you know so far for sure? For sure. Nothing. There's no information there. Right? If we saw Democrats desperately trying to defend what was in there, or saying, yes, it looks problematic, but maybe there's some excuse for it, or something like that, then you could start worrying. Or at least start thinking, well, there's something there, even if it's not as much as we think. But the enormous silence we're hearing suggests there's nothing there. All right? That 19 Republicans looked at it, yeah. Yeah, could you expect 19 Republicans to come away with a Republican point of view? Yes. Could you expect any one of them to cross over and say, no, all my colleagues are nuts, there's nothing there? No, you could not. It doesn't matter if there's one Republican or 150 of them, they're going to not break rank on something like that anyway. All right. if there's nothing there, why wouldn't the Dems want to release it? There, in all likelihood, there's something there that has some ambiguity, which Republicans could use as fodder, even without proof of anything. So if you were Democrats and you knew there was at least enough in there that would get people yapping about how, collusion or whatever else, in this case a different kind of collusion, you wouldn't want it out. So ambiguity is bad if the ambiguity is leaning against you. You're speculating too much. Well, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to teach you the rules of how to predict. And I'm predicting at the same time, so that you can see in public whether the rules I'm laying out pan out in this case and in other cases over time. So in my specific case, speculating, at least in this context where it's really a prediction, along with a set of objective-looking rules for deciding if the monster is in the room or not. So feel free to check my work. Why aren't the Dems saying there's no monster then? How many Democrats have seen it? That's the part I don't know. It seems to me that if any Democrats had seen it, we'd know about that, right? They've refused to look at it? I don't think that's true. If there's nothing in the memo, there should be no problem releasing it? False. You may have just joined. No, if there's nothing in the document, but there is some ambiguity about how things are worded, you would not want to release it if that ambiguity is working against your side. I'm saying in all likelihood there's no monster, but there might be some ambiguity in that document that will allow Republicans to say, look, there's the monster right there, while Democrats are saying, I'm looking at it too. Don't see the monster. Is there one person in our world who is a good monster confirmer? Who would be the best person in the world to look at this situation and judge whether the person who says, yes, there's a monster, or the person who says, I don't see it, is the right one? Who would you look to judge? Trump. Yes, the answer is Alan Dershowitz. Because if we're talking about a legal matter or a constitutional matter, and he's your authority on both, he's the only person you know who has demonstrated time and again the ability to see both sides and judge that one is factually most useful. I would argue that I'm the other one, but without the knowledge of the law and the Constitution. So in this particular case, wait for the memo to come out, wait for Alan Dershowitz to tell you there's a problem or not a problem. Keep in mind that he's a Democrat who has backed a position that Trump and the Republicans have backed in terms of the collusion story. And so if he goes back and takes the other side, I'd find that credible. I see a request to drink the tears of our enemies, and let us do that. To the tears of our enemies. All right, I saw an article today that said the Afghan government and the Taliban are getting close to having negotiations, which would be kind of a big deal. And this article, which I think you still need to wait for a little confirmation on it, at least this one article suggested that the change in military flexibility that the president has given our military has made a difference, and that the Taliban is looking flexible now. So if that's true, that would be another success to chalk up to the president's approach. The ex-Google CEO is in North Korea? I don't know. Yeah, the California seceding from the Union story is so far just this kind of story that's fun but not likely. Now, let me give you a couple answers to questions that if you're a Trump supporter, you're probably getting all the time. So here are the questions and with my answers. One question is, if President Trump is such a good persuader, why does he have such low approval levels? Here's your answer. In the old days, when candidates were not that different, and it used to be said there's not a dime of difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, in those conditions, people who did not vote for a candidate for president could warm up to the other side because they're kind of close. But today there was so much difference between Republicans and Democrats that an approval poll is really nothing more than taking attendance. Did you vote for Trump? Yes. Do you still like him? Yes. Did you vote for Hillary? Yes. Do you still like him? Yes. And then you also have this huge disconnect between people willing to say that they like some of the things that are happening in the country, such as the economy, the fight against ISIS, etc., taxes, but they can still disapprove of everything the president says and does because of the way he does it. All right. So we've never seen that before. So you have sort of a one-off situation. So when people ask you why the approval levels are low, you could point them to the small business confidence levels that are the highest they've ever been. Because the economy does capture most of the things in society. You know, if everything's going well, the economy is probably going well too, or at least there's optimism that it's heading in the right direction. So the presidential approval poll for this president, given the polarized nature of the world, doesn't mean a thing. It's really just an opinion on his personality, not on the results of his job. Here's another one. People say, if he's such a master persuader, why does half of the country, not like him, etc.? Here's another answer to that. Michael Jordan was arguably one of the top 2 basketball players in the world, and he only made half his baskets. That's what it took to be the best basketball player in the world, right? If you're running for president, the goal is not 100% of people will agree with you and love you. That's not the goal. The goal is around 50%, okay? Or just enough to get your party in control so you can control stuff. So he achieved what Michael Jordan achieved. He achieved about 50% success shooting baskets versus, persuading the country. Turns out that's enough to be president. It's enough to be the best basketball player in the world. And the real game is persuading your base. And if you look at how all the other Republican candidates tried to persuade their base, not nearly as good. And then you look at, once in the job, how is he performing the job of president? And I would say there are some notable things which need work: healthcare, infrastructure, race relations. Those are probably the 3 big ones. Definitely need work. I can't say anything good about those things, but I also feel optimistic that some of that could come around over time. All right, somebody's asking about Basket of Deplorables. That's a chapter in my book, Win Bigly. You should read Win Bigly if you'd like to learn persuasion for yourself. Scott, you must have the lowest blood pressure of anyone. I have the lowest blood pressure in my family. Does that count? Now, let's see, I had another, here's another way to distinguish fake news from real news. All right? There are lots of things which have lots and lots of evidence for it. And so you say, well, if there's lots and lots of evidence for something, that almost certainly must be true. But in the real world, that's not true. Having lots and lots of evidence for things is not true. Let me give you a sense of how circularly how circular the reason is. All right. So if I say to you, let me give you an example. If I say to you, I'm a Democrat, and it's obvious to me, I can see the monster in the room, and it's President Trump, who's a big old racist. I see it, it's right in front of me. The first thing you ask is, can anybody else see it? Well, I'm in the room too, the room in this case being the United States, and I don't see it. I don't see it. I'm looking right where you're looking, and I don't see it. So somebody says, come on, all the evidence. And I say, for example, what? And a person might say, well, let's just start with the obvious. The birther thing that the President Trump did. There's no way that you can explain away that birther thing except that he's a big old racist. To which I say, well, it's also the most common political trick that you would use against anyone if you had the ammo. And he had the ammo. There was enough ambiguity at the time about the birth certificate that it was ammo. He did the same thing with Ted Cruz. And the question I put to you is, if Hillary Clinton had some ambiguity about whether she'd been born in Norway or the United States, would President Trump have used that knowledge to question her qualifications to run for president? If you think there's any chance he would have ignored that useful tool that is the most common of all political tools to say, you're running for Senate, but you've only moved into this neighborhood lately, or you have two homes, your residence is really that other home. It's the most common trick in the world, and he never mentioned race at any time during any of this. Is it his fault that the president had a connection to Africa? No. He's our first African American president. That's just what it was. That's not an accusation. So now the person in the room with me says, okay, but I know it's still racism, not because of the facts, because you just explained how he would have done the same technique with Hillary Clinton if he had the ammo. He just didn't have the ammo in her particular case. But it's still racism, and here's why I know why. Because of all the other things he did, which I know are racism, that makes this one clearly racism too, in his mind at least. To which I say, mention another one. And then they say, well, what about that Charlottesville thing? And then I say, well, is it more likely that he just spoke without knowing the details and he assumed that somebody who was not a racist was there just in favor of keeping historical statues? Or is it more likely he came out in favor of racists who wanted to do bad things or, discriminate against his own family, all of his closest advisors, his son-in-law, his grandkids, and that Israel loves him, and he named Jerusalem the embassy in the capital of Israel? Are any of these things consistent with your belief that he stood in public and said, yeah, I'm with the racists who are chanting anti-Semitic things? And then the person in the room who sees the monster says, okay, I hear you on that one. But, and sure enough, the birther thing isn't what it looks like, and the Charlottesville thing isn't what it looks like. But what about, and then he just keeps going. Now, I'm not going to do it on this Periscope, but I can promise you that everything except the housing discrimination case from the 70s is not only easy to explain in non-racist terms, but it's far more common explanation. It is a far more common explanation that the president just assumed there were some other people there who were not racists than it is that he decided to go on television and side with the racists and then a few days later say, no, I hate the racists. None of that makes sense. But just talking before he had all the facts, you see that every day. One of them is, in the Central Park Five, the police believed they were guilty, and the president believed they were guilty because the police believed they were guilty. He never mentioned race. He's anti-crime. He's been anti-crime forever. So if you see race in that, it's because you think the other things he's doing are racist, right? So the argument that he's a racist is not because any one of those situations holds up. It's because you think that they all support each other. That's what confirmation bias does, right? If you watch a trial, you'll see one lawyer give you confirmation bias and say, all of these things couldn't possibly be true unless this person's guilty. And then the defense says, well, let's look at them one at a time. There's another explanation for this, there's another explanation for that, there's another explanation for that. Right? It's the most common thing in the world. Yeah, and as somebody said, before he was president, Trump won awards from the black community for being, somebody said he donated a building for Jesse Jackson, some kind of cause Jackson was working on. I don't know the details of that. So here's what you want to look for. If somebody says there's tons and tons of evidence for a thing to be true, and yet each time you look at one of the pieces of evidence, it falls apart if you're only looking at it individually, and the only thing that keeps it credible is because of all the other pieces of information, but when you look at them individually, they don't hold up either, then you're probably seeing a clever persuasion from a partisan. He should play more golf. Yeah, things are going pretty well. He should just keep golfing. Do you think he is 239 pounds? Well, here's what let me just give you an observation. The photos that his critics are showing are likely the heaviest he's ever been. And so they compare him to people who are 239 and they say, this can't possibly be true. But my observation, which I made before any of this, before he had his physical, is that he looked like he was losing weight, which I'm guessing would not be unusual once you're in the office of the president, because I do think that the chefs who work for a president are putting a little bit of pressure on him directly and indirectly to eat more healthy food and maybe eat less of it. So my guess is that he's closer to 239 than he was at any time during his heaviest pictures. Yeah, and he managed to turn the entire left into a bunch of fat shamers. I actually saw a quote by Megyn Kelly in which she supported fat shaming because she said that some women like it. She said she liked it when she was young. It helped her stay thin. I wouldn't have expected that. Somebody's asking about him not releasing his tax returns. The president should not release his tax returns for the same reason that Democrats don't want the release the memo to be released. If there's anything on there that is not a problem but could be construed as if it is, it would be crazy to release it. So you would just be giving weapons to your enemies which is different than saying there's something illegal on there. It's unlikely that his accountants allowed something illegal on his tax returns. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just looking at your comments right now, if you're wondering why I'm being quiet. All right. Obama, deep state. We shall see. But I wouldn't get too excited about the release the memo. Yeah, there's no line on the tax returns that say, I spent $1 million on Russian laundering or whatever the hell he's being blamed for now. The other thing I'm seeing in the news a lot is the thought that he could be complicit in some kind of Russian money laundering because Russians bought properties in his buildings. And I'm thinking to myself, if it's money laundering to sell somebody something, I'm pretty sure we've all done a little money laundering, whether we liked it or not. Memo tactic to discredit Mueller. Well, yeah, of course. So I've said this before, but I'm going to make this observation based on body language alone, that Brennan and Clapper are the two least credible individuals you might ever, and this guy Rick, what's his name? Rick somebody? And there's another one who they have on all the time, who just based on body language, I would judge them to be the least credible people on television. Rick Wilson, yeah. Rick Wilson is, he's the eye roller. Like, oh my God, you don't really believe that? The spy ring in Congress, we don't know enough about that. Yeah, if you look at both of their Clapper has this weird upside down smile. If you ever see James Clapper, he's always like that. How did I get Dogbert in the Thump book? Well, the artist and author of the book follows me on Twitter, I guess. The guys behind the 17 intel reports. Yeah, it was never true that there were 17 intelligence agencies who were on the same side. What was true, in all likelihood, is that maybe one of them looked into it and the other 16 said, well, we're not going to go against those guys. They've been right before. And then the news reports it as 17 agencies, they all agree. That was ridiculous from the jump. The moment I heard that, I was like, 17 all did the same work? If 17 people were all doing the same work to get the same conclusion, I think we can get rid of 16 of them. Let's cut their budget. Should Trump grant amnesty for dreamers? I was saying just today that I don't like to answer should questions. Whenever you hear a question of should somebody do something, our flag should go up. If you see any statement or question with the word should, you are being manipulated, either by the question or by the answer or by the statement. Right? There are things that are legal or illegal. There are things which are immoral or unethical, according to people's personal standards. But should is a manipulation word, not a word you should, not a word you should. It's nearly impossible not to use it in a sentence. So let me be consistent with what I'm saying. I started to say you shouldn't use the word should, and realized how ridiculous that is. So let me put this in more better words. It is not clear thinking to use the word should. What you might mean is, would it be politically bad? Would it be illegal? Would it have a repercussion? Okay, so if you're asking those questions, those could be answered, but should is just too squishy. But I'll acknowledge I use the word should all the time. It's just a shorthand when people know what you're talking about. So let me answer the question. President Trump is in negotiations in which it would not be smart for him as a negotiator to give away too much ahead of the negotiations. So when you say should he or will he grant amnesty for the Dreamers, the question is, will it happen? And then would it be legal? And what would be the outcome? I think the outcome would be positive. I think the ethical argument supports at least keeping them in the country. I'm not going to deal with the question of what is amnesty and what is something that looks like it. And I think that most of the country is on the same side. Most of the country would approve of keeping the people who essentially grew up here and haven't caused any trouble. But the should question, I would leave that to the negotiations. Senator McConnell doesn't know what his positions are. Well, that's not surprising. DACA expires March 5th. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can't anything that's expired be unexpired with the stroke of a pen? Is there any reason DACA can't be renewed if we wanted to? Prediction on memo release timing. Well, let me make a prediction about the so-called memo of release the memo. If it really is a blockbuster bombshell, you'll probably see it fairly quickly, because the President of the United States obviously has clearance to see it. So President Trump either has seen it or will see it quickly. If it's real, meaning that it really is damaging to his opponents, I would expect him to declassify it right away. If it looks ambiguous, meaning that it looks like it's, you could interpret it more than one way, he might choose to hold on to it a little bit longer. Because the longer he holds on to it, the longer this idea seeps into the public consciousness that there's something sketchy going on, which probably works to his advantage. So now, the other wild card is if there's something in it that's so bad it could actually destabilize the country or the government, well, then that would be another reason to wait and get your plan together about how to do it in the most responsible way. But in general, if it takes a long time to see the memo, I would say there's less important things in there than if you see it tomorrow. If you see it tomorrow, it's probably a really big deal, because I think the president would just declassify it or do whatever he needs to do as president. And by now he's already thinking about it. They want to do it right so it's not discredited. The memo has to speak for itself. It doesn't matter how it gets declassified. Let me put it this way. If Republicans can't convince the president to declassify it, and they can't convince him, in 48 hours to do it, there's a reason. It's documents, not just a memo. There were many incriminating things, all right? And remember, as long as all the people saying there are many incriminating things, and it's a big old bombshell, as long as they're all on the same side, there is no information upon which you can make a decision. There's just none. That doesn't mean there's no bombshell. I'm just saying that you don't have any information, just because one side says, this will be bad for the other side. Gorka just tweeted, it's the highest level of corruption. Again, it could be, but if you had to bet on it, I'd bet against it. Someone needs to explain that point to Scott about DACA. What point? Might be a point I missed. One Republican said Democrats refused to read it. Really? Do you really believe that Democrats refused to read it without giving a reason? Until a non-Trump lover touches, I don't buy it. Correct. So you're saying don't reflexively do exactly what the Trump derangement syndrome crowd is doing. Correct. Why do they need to read it? Kennedy just said vindication. Well, I'm feeling that there's going to be some almost, well, should I speculate? If there's anything here, no, I'm not going to speculate. Yeah, people saying it's multiple pages, so there must be something there. Yeah, that's not a thing. Do you think Trump is 6'3", easy to prove? Well, my understanding is that people lose an inch by that age, maybe more. So he is at an age where he should be less tall than he was. I've noticed that how tall is Eric Trump? Because he looks to be several inches taller than his dad. You're taller in the morning? I know I am. I'm 7 feet tall on Periscope. I'm going to speculate that all right. Okay, I'll speculate. This is not a prediction. This would be a description of events that would match what everybody's saying and also be no big deal. Suppose the Steele dossier was in fact a primary, it doesn't have to be the only one, but a primary source that the FBI used to get a FISA warrant. And suppose that when they took that information and presented it to the court, They said, we got this information from this dossier. The dossier was put together by this individual. This individual is not 100% credible, but it's credible enough, it meets our standard of a flag going up, that based on this, and maybe there's some other independent information which is also not conclusive, that it's enough to poke around. Because if it's true, it's a big deal, and we don't have confirmation, but this dossier gives us enough to worry about that we think we need to look into it. Now, if what I just described is what that memo says, you would expect that Republicans would say it's the end of the world, and Democrats would say, you mean they just used information that was available? As long as they described it accurately when they got their warrant, I don't know that any crime has been committed, nor do I see that treason has been committed, so long as they believed that there was something worth looking at. Now, if there's something like a memo that says, we know this information is false, as opposed to not credible, if they know it's false and used it anyway, and that's in writing, well, then you've got a big problem. But I don't think that would ever be in writing, would it? Who would be dumb enough to put that in writing? So it's also possible that when Strzok said, we've got this insurance policy, blah, 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 just in case Trump gets elected, I don't know that that's illegal, even if it's the worst case scenario. Now let me explain why. If Strzok and his girlfriend both thought that it would be bad for the country for Trump to get elected, that's just a political opinion. If their job was to track down this collusion thing or not, and if they decided that if he lost the election, it didn't really matter anyway, because it just wouldn't be worth pursuing, because that would mean that the Russians just wasted their money, right? You wish the Russians had not tried to influence the election, but you also know that they always do, right? And we're influencing theirs, and everybody's trying to influence everybody's election everywhere, because that's the world we live in. You're just not allowed to talk about it. That's what your intelligence services are doing, while the people above that level say, no, we don't do that. No, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't even have a CIA. Interfere with other countries' elections? That's crazy talk. Why would we ever do that? All right. So if it's true that the FBI had enough suspicions, but not confirmed, that there might be something over there with this Russia collusion stuff, it would be probably legal, but enough to get fired for, that you're saying that you would call that an insurance policy. And you would say, if he doesn't get elected, we don't really need to look into it, because Russia tried to influence us. They try every year. They try all the time. It didn't work. He didn't get elected. Doesn't matter. Let it drop. But the insurance policy would be that if he does get elected, they had enough that it was worth looking into. That doesn't mean they meant to fake it. That would be a crime. If they legitimately thought there was enough smoke that without confirmation they should at least go to the next step of investigation, you would have a situation in which the Republicans could legitimately say, from their point of view, this is the worst thing we've ever seen, and the Democrats could say, they're just saying that if he doesn't get elected, it's not important. So the insurance policy is that this only matters if he gets elected. I'm using the language of a private conversation. And by the way, remember when I told you that when you take, remember the shithole comment? So the president allegedly used the word shithole in a private-ish small conversation that wasn't supposed to go public. And I told you that the the meaning of that changes as soon as you make it public. So what you think about what happened in the room changes completely only because you heard it in a public setting. That changes the context. Had you been in the room, it's entirely possible that the Republicans who say they didn't even hear it, that they actually just sort of flushed the word as it went by because it didn't mean what it meant when it was public, right? It was just talking, negotiating, hard language, and it's entirely possible that when they say they didn't hear it, that's a truthful memory, but it's not true. In other words, they do not remember it because it wasn't important in the context they heard it, so they just forgot it. You don't remember every word you hear. Likewise, and this is, an analogy used for explaining a situation, not for persuasion. Likewise, the conversation between Strzok and his girlfriend were private conversations in which they both knew all the context. So for him to call it an insurance policy was probably just a political statement that you would say to a friend. The moment you take that private conversation and pull it out of private and you make it a public thing, it sounds like treason. Sounds like treason. Completely different from being treason. Likewise, shithole sounds like racism when you hear it in a public setting. It's hard to not hear it that way. In a private setting, it could have sounded like negotiating and nothing else, right? So you should expect that when that question of what did you mean by insurance policy comes up, Strzok will say, well, we didn't want him to be president, but if he didn't get elected anyway, it didn't matter. If he did get elected, it is our job as the FBI to follow up on leads about collusion with Russia, and we had enough to move in that direction because it's our job. But we wouldn't have had to do that job if he didn't get elected, because it just wouldn't have mattered. It would have been a lower priority. Maybe they still look into it anyway, but it would have been a lower priority. All right. So my prediction is that the insurance policy comment, once put in context, will not sound exactly like you thought it did. The same way the shithole comment, taken out of context, was almost certainly not what you thought it was, once you hear it in public. There's a vegan place in the Peely. I haven't tried that. WikiLeaks is offering $1 million for the memo. That's interesting that they would offer $1 million for a memo that's going to come out anyway. I don't see any chance it's not going to come out. Unless there's some clever legal thing that somebody does to keep it there. Yes, somebody just said that saying shithole is so fun. Literally this morning, I was kind of hoping I would get asked to do another televised interview, just so I could say shithole on national TV. I've appeared once on Smirconish since then, but I chose not to use that word, and I feel bad because how often do you get to say shithole on national TV in your life? All right, this window is very short. I want to jump in. I want to say it. Yeah, somebody called them shitholies. That's funny. What? WikiLeaks is complicit with Russia. I haven't seen the proof of that. It just says Chicago. It's Funny that the first part of Chicago sounds like that. I never thought of that until just now. Did you hear what happened to Cernovich? No. What happened to him? Something happened to him recently? Yeah, when they say asshole, you hear asshole. I was hearing that as soon as they started saying that. I was like, well, that's not an upgrade. The venue for his event canceled at last minute. Well, that doesn't surprise me. So, an update on my speaking requests. I told you that when I started writing about Trump, that I lost my speaking deals. More recently, I've had a number of inquiries for speaking, but I've chosen to decline all of them. Before I wasn't getting any offers at all, but in the last month I've gotten a number, and I've declined all of them. And the reason is this: it's not fair to the client. It's really not fair to the client, because the moment my name appears on their advertisement, normally they would promote an event and say, these speakers are going to be here. The moment they do that, their life is going to turn bad, and they're going to have to come back to me and say, well, it turns out we got so much pushback. We're not really a political organization. We're just, the Association of Rubber Band Manufacturers or whatever we are. We don't need this. And then they would need to redo all their promotions. They would need to back out of their deal with me. They would probably have to pay a kill fee, because usually you negotiate with a kill fee. And I'm not comfortable putting an unsuspecting client in that situation. Now, even though I always reveal all these risks, if somebody takes the risk, even though it's their risk to take, I'm not comfortable, because I don't think they're doing it wisely. And I just don't want to be part of it. You don't seem pro-Trump, are you? I'm very pro-Trump. I'm very pro-Trump in the way that I'm pro most of our presidents. I'm pro-American, and right now Trump is representing America, and he's doing a good job on the big stuff. I'm still giving him a grade of F for race relations. He has let's say a D- for health care. Maybe I'll give him a D or a C+ for health care, because he killed the mandate, which at least his side wanted to happen. So that's not nothing. But now the low grades could certainly come up. It's entirely possible they could come up. I disagree with him on Southern statues, the Civil War statues. I think those are just decorations, and you shouldn't, and they're offensive. Take them down. They're just decorations. Get rid of offensive decorations. So there are plenty of things I disagree with him on, or I criticize that he hasn't gotten right yet. Now, race relations is tricky for the president, because he got elected on a promise of not talking about identity politics. So in order for him to easily fix his situation with race relations, he would have to, one, make all the enemy media suddenly like him and stop talking about that. I don't think that's possible, because as long as most of the media is hammering on this largely made-up issue, he's going to have a tough time with it. But it also hasn't stopped him from getting elected. It hasn't stopped him from being effective in his job. So while I personally find it a huge problem, I don't know if you've had this experience. Do a little fact checking for me. See if you've had this experience. Since the president got elected, have you either been part of a conversation or even overheard with any, I'm going to use the term, brown citizens. You know what I'm talking about, just non-white citizens of the United States. Have you heard the level of emotional anguish that they're dealing with as sort of the context of their entire experience? Right? It's easy for us to say, hey, black people, get over it because the economy is good. Hey, you like it when ISIS is beaten too. Hey, brown people, you should be happy because North Korea might be coming to the table. You could say all that stuff, but you're playing with the should. Like you should feel better. You should not be bothered by it. Should is lazy thinking. The reality is that black folks, brown folks, I think less so the LGBTQ crowd, but still they would be worried, have legitimate, down to the DNA level fear of living in, quote, Trump's America. So if you can be happy as a Republican and as a supporter of President Trump, at the same time you're watching some 30 or I don't know what the percentage is, maybe 30% of the country is afraid in like almost a mortal fear kind of way, if you could be happy with that situation, then you are not a team player. If you're a team player, you'd be helping me see if we can reduce that level of anxiety. Because there are two problems. One is the reality of living in this country and dealing with racism in sort of an everyday way. So there's this reality problem. But on top of that, there's the how do you feel about it. So the reality might be, it's possible, I don't know, but it's possible that the reality of racism is less than it's ever been. It's possible. The feeling, and when I say it's possible, I mean, I don't know how you'd measure it, but if it's true that a black person can get a job and do what they want to do and go through life without structural problems, there's no law against anything. For everyone that discriminates, there's another company that would like to have more diversity. If that's your situation, maybe it's the best it's ever been. But in terms of how people feel, it's close to about the worst it's ever been. Let's say worst in 20 years. Obviously it was worse, beyond that. Somebody's saying it's disingenuous. I don't even know what you're talking about. What have I just said that anybody would disagree with? I literally am baffled that I've said anything in the last 5 minutes. We need to get away from feelings. Okay, there it is. Your reality is how you feel. Right? So if the facts are right but you feel wrong, you do not have a solution. Right? The psychology of how you feel is your experience. That's your life. Your life is how you feel. Your life is not the facts. The facts are independent from you. So if all the facts are right and people feel badly about it, you still have a problem. And you still have an obligation to fix it if the people experiencing this problem are on your team. And you're either Team America or you're not. And if part of your team is feeling like is being victimized by the other part of the team, that is your problem. That's your damn problem. Or if that's not your problem, what the hell does Make America Great Again mean to you, right? If it's not Team America, I don't know what movie you're watching. Let me throw out the most controversial thing. For those who wait to the end, you may notice I often leave my most controversial thoughts till the end of a long Periscope, because only the people who really want to listen to me are still here. All right. When we talk about equality, typically we talk about quality of opportunity, but we also, and this is more debatable, but it's part of the conversation, we talk about the equality of outcomes. In this case, outcomes are getting a job and, having a life that's the same, objectively it looks the same as everybody else. So there are two things, equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And most of the debate is about those two things. But I would argue that the point of life is to be happy, right? If there's an afterlife, then there's, more to it. But the point here is we're all trying to pursue happiness. Like, the pursuit of happiness is literally in our Constitution. It's not just a right, but there's a reason it's so prominent in the Constitution. It's sort of our job. We're pursuing happiness. But why does nobody talk about equality of happiness? Because you could have different outcomes and be just as happy. It turns out that happiness doesn't correspond to what's happening as much as it should. There's a concept called baseline happiness, where they find that, if this is true of, say, people who have had an amputation. If you go through something terrible like an amputation, you're going to be really unhappy. But it turns out that you end up drifting back to the same starting place you were before. And all of us seem to be born with some kind of set point for happiness. Mine might be lower than yours, but there's not much variation within our range. So take, for example, I'll just use an extreme example. Let's take an undiscovered or an uncontacted tribe deep in the Congo or the most remote part of Africa. I think there are still some tribes that have never been contacted by civilization. If you were to measure their happiness and compare it to the happiness of people using their cell phones all day, who would win? I don't know. I think they would be about equal. So the people in these uncontacted tribes that have nothing we have, they don't have our opportunity, they don't have our outcomes in terms of they don't have cars and houses and everything like that. But their happiness might be better. So if you were to take those people and let's say they all immigrate instantly to the United States and they form a little community and they don't get out much. Do they have equality of opportunity? Probably not, because they can't speak the language and they've got maybe there's some discrimination. And do they have equality of outcomes? Not even close, because they don't have the full availability that everybody else has. But they might be happier. So why do we have a government that is entirely focused on making our opportunities and our outcomes look the same when we don't judge our own happiness that way? We judge our happiness by how happy we are, and it's somewhat independent of all those other things. So I would propose a different standard. I would propose a fourth thing, and I call it the equal strategy. Right? So there's equal opportunity, there's equal outcome, and then there's equal happiness. Those are three ways you can measure what's equal. I would say the best functional thing to measure, at least in this point in time, this was not true, years ago, but today, that if you have a strategy for getting a great job, and I don't have access to your strategy, for whatever reason, discrimination or something else, our typical reflex is to say, hey, I'm not equal. You've got a strategy, and I can't use your strategy. But what if I have a different strategy that gets me to the same place, but it's just different, and you don't have that access to that strategy? In that case, we both have a strategy that's sort of equal. Let me give you an example. If you are an African American kid, you go to school, you get good grades, and you graduate. You're facing a world in which discrimination is undoubtedly real. And so there's some number of companies, some number of bosses that are going to maybe not look at your resume, maybe hire the other candidate above you. That's all real. At the same time, virtually every Fortune 500 company has this big problem, which is they don't have enough diversity, and they have a big problem hiring to make it so. So you walk into any one of those Fortune 500 companies, and what are your chances of getting hired if, let's say, you're equivalent to other people applying for the job? Real good, right? So you have an equivalent strategy that's different from other people's strategy, but it's just as good. You just have to know you have it. Now, if you're a poor black kid and all you've ever heard is that everybody discriminates, in your mind you would not know that you also have a strategy that can not only work, it works really well. It doesn't just work, it works really, really well. All right? Fortune 500 companies are begging for you. They're begging for you. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. Equality of basic comfort would be a good start. Yeah, it's true that people need a certain amount of money to be happy. There's something that I realized spending time this week in Hawaii, and I guess I've realized this in other ways before, but you've of course heard the saying that money doesn't buy happiness. And you've probably heard me say, I've been poor and I've been rich, and I can tell you, money definitely helps with the happiness. But only within a range, right? You know, you have to get rid of your big problems with money, but then you're kind of on your own to actually be happy. There are plenty of rich people who are unhappy. But I've noticed that when I'm in a good place, like physically, like where I am now, Hawaii, that I'm kind of happy all the time, even when bad things are happening. You know, well, there aren't too many bad things happening. But so while money doesn't buy happiness, I think location does. And it seems to me that if you could solve for a location, a lot of people who are unhappy would be a lot happier. All right. Strong relationships help as well. That's true. Why the hell don't you move then? Well, I live in Northern California, where my neighborhood is close to ideal. And the trouble with Hawaii is that you can get island fever and you want to move back pretty quickly. So I like my roots in California. All right, I think we've done enough. My number count is going down, and I'm going to sign off now. Go have a great day. I plan to. Bye.